have a bit of a laugh every now and then, a New Zealand company out of Avondale putting product into the Empire State Building, it's just, and some schools in Egypt, and we did a casino in Angola. I think we just ignore the fact that we're a small island at the bottom of the world, and we just sort of say, look, why not? Why can't we be up in these markets doing what we're doing?
The New Zealand Business Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, your strategic and proactive IT partner.
Greetings, I'm your host Paul Spain, futurist and chief executive at Gorilla Technology. I love seeing individuals and their organisations thrive. This is what the New Zealand Business Podcast is all about, through sharing the business, leadership and innovation learnings of our most incredible people. This episode, I'm joined by Rob Woolner, Managing Director of Autex Acoustics in New Zealand. Founded in 1967 as a textiles manufacturer, today their business is turning over in excess of $200 million and focused primarily on manufacturing acoustic products and the Warriors rugby league team, which they now own. Rob joined Autex nearly 15 years ago and has played an instrumental role in establishing Autex's strong presence in the UK, Australia, and the United States. Autex products have won business in global brands such as Adobe, Amazon, Google, and Disney, and are now focused on driving innovation in both sustainable acoustics and high-performance insulation. Under Rob's leadership and management, Autex New Zealand is refining that legacy with continued global growth and a strong domestic focus on energy efficiency, product circularity, quality manufacturing, and staff well-being. Today, we delve into Rob's journey from sales rep to managing director, looking at his personal growth and the evolution of Autex as a Kiwi company shaping healthier, more sustainable buildings. The New Zealand Business Podcast is brought to you by One New Zealand and my company, Gorilla Technology. If you're stuck with how to get the very best out of IT, or you're worried about cybersecurity or data privacy risks, then let's grab a coffee together. Get in touch. Well, greetings and welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here, Rob Woolner.
Thanks, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
Now, I always like to hear a bit of the backstory, so tell us a little bit about where you were born and where you grew up, Rob.
Yeah, I was born in England, actually, Southampton. My parents are both English and very English still today when their mannerisms and the way they speak, etc. So, yeah, I was born there and only 6 months old, came to New Zealand with them. My father was an anaesthetist, so he was practicing down here, and then they relocated permanently at that point. So first to Christchurch for a couple of years and then relocated up to Auckland and brought up on East Auckland, actually, out in Howick Way. So went to school out there, Claines College, and now I'm married at Westie, so I'm based out west Auckland now.
Okay, oh, good stuff. So, yeah, tell us about those childhood years. What were the things that sort of interested you, and do you look back and sort of see any connection with current life and business and so on?
Interestingly, my grandfather was in the police. He was the British head of police in Tonga, actually, and before that he was in the Gurkhas, and he's had quite an interesting career, so I was always quite fascinated by that. So in my mind, growing up, I always wanted to be in the police. So everything sort of revolved around getting to that point, which I managed to do, but didn't stay there too long. So, yeah, my parents actually separated when I was about 6 or so. So, yeah, still saw my old man quite a bit, but brought up with my mum and my sister. So, and always, I think, sort of searched out that male mentor, and luckily enough, managed to have some good friends that I spent a lot of time with and sort of their fathers. And, yeah, it had quite an impact, I think, on me growing up because I think, you always sort of look to your father for that inspiration and everything. And he was able to give me that, he was a hard worker and he was, as I say, an anaesthetist and then worked for Merck Sharp and Dome for a while and had a really successful career. So I always sort of looked up to that. And it's funny, as you get older, you start to see the mannerisms and those sorts of things develop in yourself, and you say, man, I start to look like the way my dad runs and all that sort of stuff, right? I don't know. It's but no, it's great, and that's also been awesome as I've become a parent too. I got 3 boys, so I think that was quite impactful.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So tell us about that journey, from school to being in the police. What did that look like?
I sort of couldn't wait to get in the police. And back then, it was sort of the thing to do. You got to go to university, right? So my parents said, you need to go to university before you go in the police. So I sort of thinking, well, what can I study? And I said, I quite like biology at school. It was a bit of fun, learning about the earth and all those sorts of things and birds and everything. So I went and did a biology degree at Auckland and didn't really think about career paths outside of that, what do you actually do with a biology degree? But every now and then there's uses for it, I think. And if anything, it's just another opportunity to apply yourself and learn how to study and learn how to work and retain information and all of those things. So certainly don't regret doing that. But I actually finished my degree, the last few exams while I was down at police college. So literally couldn't wait to get down there.
So when you look back at those disciplines and things that sort of came out from that time at university, how important do you think those have actually been in your career journey?
I think sort of learning how to study has always been good, how to sort of seek out new information and retain it and apply it, I think is great. But interestingly, I went back and did my MBA later on in my career, and I found that just so much more impactful, working and learning and then applying it straight back into the work that you're doing. And I sort of went on a journey there with that and found that, I guess, a much better way of learning. But look, for me, I was luckily enough always fairly disciplined. So, I just didn't want to waste time. So at university, I sort of said, I'm not going to fail a paper. I just couldn't stand having to do something again. So even though I really struggled with statistics and maths and all those things, really weren't my subject and still aren't, just worked really hard at making sure I didn't have to do it twice.
Yeah, good job. So, when you think about that desire to be in the police, you talked around your grandfather's, experience there, but, was there much sort of depth to that in terms of what you thought that might look like for you in terms of as a career?
Not too sure, really. I think, no, just always sort of thought that was where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. I think I've always sort of cared about people and sort of wanted to make a bit of a difference, I think. And it's funny because someone, as is going into the police, sort of said, if you think you're going to make a difference in the police, you're not, which was a really weird statement to make, right? But
it's harsh.
But honestly, once you
on that track,
once you've been in there, I get where they were coming from. Like in some aspects of it, the problems are so large that on your own,
you don't necessarily see the result, right?
Yeah.
But everybody can make a difference.
Sure.
It's like, sure, he says.
Yeah, I didn't quite know
Not much conviction there, right?
how to take that statement, right? But the police were some of the, I grew up incredibly quickly. I was young, so I was 20, 22, 23.
Yeah.
Went into the police at a time when they were quite short-staffed. So I found that quite challenging in that you're literally thrown in fairly new, fairly young into situations that you just have honestly no idea how to deal with. And for one, it's great because you have to figure it out. So I think that was awesome, being able to problem solve quickly and work through quite challenging situations. But, some of the people I met and worked with were absolutely fantastic, and I'm still friends with a bunch of them now. I think too, just that maturity and realising the world. I luckily had a fairly privileged life. You grow up around good people and good friends, and you sort of think the world's this wonderful place, and then you got to realise actually there's some balance to that. And I think having to deal with that, and look, to be honest, that's one of the reasons I didn't stay in there. I think I probably wasn't suited to it. I sort of went deep and really wanted to make a difference and all of those things. And after a while, I don't know, I sort of struggled with it, I think, and I definitely don't regret it, and it was some of the best learnings of my career. And I've always been able to apply them, and to be honest, the roles I've gone for afterwards, the fact that I was in the police has been a really important factor for getting an opportunity, So I think everything happens for a reason, and it was great, but I sort of didn't know what to do with myself when I thought, man, maybe this isn't for me, because I'd spent my whole life thinking I'm going to be in the police forever. And then I just went, man, what do I do now?
Wow.
Which was a huge moment. But
And that problem solving that you talked about, how much of that did you have to do entirely on your own? You were out on the beat, were you?
Yeah, I was. You spend your first 2 years sort of working through different parts of policing, but all sort of frontline response constable. And I was policing in Otara, Papatawi, Otahu. So yeah, fairly full on. environments. And again, we might have had, 2 or 3 staff on a night shift. And when you find yourself in situations with 15, 20 people, out of control in South Auckland somewhere, 2 or 3 people can't really make too much of a difference. So a few times you got to walk away, you got to realise, man, we got to get out of the situation and come back. And again, for me, sometimes that didn't sit that well with me, so. But there were some great, as I say, great learnings and some really good times within that. Police College was fantastic, really enjoyed the challenge of that. And again, having studied and stuff before helped with that process. We're alongside other people that hadn't done any of that and found Police College and everything really difficult.
If you would kind of, look back on that time, what sits with you as maybe the most difficult experience that you had to, that you encountered and you had to deal with?
I guess when you just didn't have the experience, so you sort of felt a little bit out of your depth. I think, and a lot of these situations you're walking into are quite big moments in people's lives too. But for me, the first suicide that I went to was huge. I'd never really seen a dead body, etc. before, and you're walking into an environment, again, great family, and whatever circumstances led to that. It was just so tragic, and then having to try and follow up and take statements and deal with the family after that, for me, was massive. And it, again, just without that experience of how to deal with it, and I think that's the importance of having really good leadership. And again, when you're in an environment like that where you're quite short-staffed, obviously you're short of some key leaders and stuff too. So I think my time there too was just, I didn't quite have some of those sort of good leaders to show the way. So I'm sure if I went back through again, I'd have a completely different experience. And like I said, still friends with a bunch of guys still in and making a real difference. So it was purely my experience of where I was at that stage of life and everything. And also tough because all my friends are out partying and I'm working shift work. And, it was a real life change going into the police that young. And maybe I wasn't quite ready for that. I'm not too sure. Still trying to play competitive sport and have a lifestyle outside of police. Whereas I think back then anyway, a lot of police that did well, all their friends were police. They'd marry a policeman. Like police was everything. For me, it was important, but I still tried to have a life outside of it.
Yeah. And in terms of the best takeaways?
I think just you can deal with anything almost after that, in terms of managing crisis moments and realising you're only as you can only play what's in front of you. And I think also realising that sometimes you don't have the answers and you need to walk away and you need to come back and reassess. And so, as I say, hugely important part of my life, and I learned a huge amount. And I still have fond memories looking back, and I almost, just before I joined Autex, actually, I was considering going back into the police, literally almost push go on that. So it certainly wasn't, I hope I haven't portrayed it too negatively, it wasn't, but it was just it was a big moment in my life being that young and just the state of play at the time.
Yeah, certainly what you described there, it's probably, really hard for most of us to understand the realities. And I especially, I guess, as a younger person with that effectively being your first full-time work. Yeah, you've got a lot to take on there. Yeah. Oh, thanks for sharing that. Now, moving on from police, when you made that call that you wanted to do something different, how did you decide, where to from here when your whole life's sort of been pointed in a particular direction?
Yeah, it was tough, to be honest. The police, I think, is great in that they offer 2 years leave without pay. So I think for that reason, they'd rather people sort of went and did something else than leave the police completely. So I took 2 years leave without pay and then just applied. I saw a job in the paper for Villa Maria as an export coordinator, and my old man had always been into wine, and so I always had a bit of an interest there, and I thought, man, that looks interesting. So literally applied for that role and luckily enough got that role, and so it just sort of unfolded from there. So I didn't have too long really between exiting police and being into something new.
How did you convince them to hire you for this role when you didn't have any work experience other than your police sort of experience behind you, that you were the right person to take that on?
Good question. And there's probably two people in my career that I feel I owe a lot to, and one of those is George Vistanich from Villa Maria. And, I was applying for a really junior role, and yet he interviewed me at 7 a.m. in the morning out at their Mangere site there. And, I think I was just relatively honest about where I'd come from, what I'd done, and I think the police looks good on the CV. You've probably experienced a few things and can maybe deal with situations. I'm not too sure, to be honest. I was fairly oblivious to it, I think. But I know I was up against a couple of other candidates that had a bit of experience, and I honestly thought I wasn't going to get the role, but he gave me that opportunity, and I actually did some travel after a year or so. And George said, when you're ready to come back, give me a call and we'll find something for you, which he did, which was great. So yeah, George Vistanich from Villa Maria and Mark Robinson from Autex again. Applying for roles I probably didn't have the experience for, and he's given me opportunity with an Autex that I certainly didn't have the experience for, but grateful for that opportunity.
What did you end up doing during that time at Villa Maria? Because you did the couple of roles, didn't you?
Yeah, I jumped into their export team, and at that time they were exporting a huge amount of Sauvignon Blanc up to the UK. It was that time when they'd overproduced, and there's just copious amounts of Sauvignon Blanc in the country that needed to find a home. So again, had a great manager there at the time, and really got involved in having a look at some export markets, even though I was more sort of taking orders and organising shipments and that sort of thing, but gave me some eyes into the manufacturing side of that, and also touching back on my biology degree, a little bit around viticulture, and did some papers with them, and I sort of really got to know a few of the winemakers quite well, and worked a vintage. They gave you the opportunity if you wanted to go down and work a vintage for a few days. So I sort of got engrossed in that wine culture and really enjoyed it. And it was, again, common ground I could have with my old man to, taste some wine together and get him some good discounts and that sort of thing. But it's something that I've really valued all the way through. And then, as I say, I did some travel, went overseas with a police buddy of mine, and we spent some time in the UK, and I came back and George offered me sort of a events management role. I was sort of helping in the cellar door there and helping with some weddings and other functions. And then a sales role popped up. And again, no sales experience, but just sort of said, look, I'm keen, I'm super keen, give me an opportunity. And they did, and started out in that fine wine side of things, and then managed to take on some restaurant, some on-premise stuff and some grocery, which was really interesting to get some eyes into that sector, and then dealt with the fine wine clients, which was great.
What do you think you learnt about sales in that environment?
I think really it's more around just trying to make friends with people, really. All you're doing is trying to find some common ground with the people you're calling on, and everything else sort of flows from there, I think. People like doing business with people they like, I think. So I loved it, just driving around Auckland, calling on, all sorts of places, and got to really talk about the wine and everything I was learning, which was cool. Yeah. And then, you start to resonate with the brand, and you start to look out for it wherever you go, and, you start to represent it and feel quite proud of some of the work you're doing. So I absolutely loved it. It was great.
But that came to an end?
Yeah, I had a really, really good manager there at the time, Italian guy, Emiliano, and he had been in sales for ages, and he sort of said to me, you've got to get your degree in sales, which is 3 years, and then you're qualified. So I think I'd done about 3 or 4 years with Villa Maria at that point, and I wasn't really looking, but I think I saw a job somewhere that had a cool car, and I think it was a tool brand or something, and you got to drive around in this flash car and do all these things. So I applied for that, again, not thinking I'd get it, and the recruiter said, look, I've just filled that role. How about this one with Autex? And so I wasn't sort of looking. I didn't really know who Autex was, but they had quite a nice sales rep car, I think a Holden station wagon and an iPhone or something, and he sort of talked me into it and said, these guys are great. And so I just went, hey, why not? It was nothing other than that. I was still relatively young, so I said, let's give it a go, and moved across to Autex.
So quite a journey that you've had at Autex. What year was it that you joined Autex?
It's the same year I got married, actually. So I
hope you can remember
I cannot
this
get
one,
that
Rob.
wrong.
You're on the spot.
2011, I joined Autex.
Good stuff. So maybe now's a good juncture to maybe get a bit of an overview of the Autex, business. So quite a storied, history over 50-something years. So maybe you can, give us the
absolutely
version.
Yeah, Autex is a great family business. I think 5 families. I mean, the story changes a little bit depending on who tells it, I think, but This is my version anyway. I think 5 founders came out from the UK in the textiles industry from up in northern England, and were working here for a textiles manufacturer, and then they sort of started moonlighting a little bit. I think they started running some additional product on night shift and sort of selling it out the back door or out of the boot of the car, and then it at some point decided, look, let's roll out our own version of this. So originally they're doing some pretty basic textiles, some jute underfelts, where they'd rip up and repurpose old Hessian sacks into some underfelts for carpets and that sort of thing.
Okay.
And then, through their time, they've sort of morphed and changed through a bunch of things, but then they were doing blankets for UNICEF at one point. I think they were in some financial difficulty, actually, and there's a story that David Robinson, one of the founders, flew over to the UK to sign this UNICEF blankets deal, and that was sort of the make or break of the company. If he didn't manage to do it, everything was going to be, it would have been a very different story. So they've sort of always done textiles, and that's where the name came from. Auckland Textiles became Autex, and they got into polyprop carpets, which was needle punch carpets that went into a lot of schools early on, and a lot of boats, actually. A lot of New Zealanders' boats will have Autex carpet through it, and garage carpet and those sorts of things. And then,
are those more the sort of carpet tiles, or what's different about that sort of carpet than?
No, I mean, needle punch polyprop, it's pretty well wearing type carpet. It could go outdoors, and it was versus some of the competition, it would hold its colour really well in UV, and it was just a really good New Zealand made robust product that sort of tended to go in all those places where you need a carpet to last. The carpet tile market actually was one of the reasons we wound that product up probably 6-7 years ago now, which was quite a big decision at the time. When I joined the business, carpets was the moneymaker, that was the product.
Wow.
And then, within 4 or 5 years, we didn't make carpet anymore, and we were making all sorts of other things. So they got into PET type products after that through the insulation side of things. So the government was offering some subsidies in and around insulating homes, which they're still doing today. But
PET, break that down.
So recycled plastic bottles, essentially. So your plastic bottles that you're drinking today, when it gets recycled, turned into a bottle flake, which then gets repurposed into a fibre, which we then use heat and pressure, really, nothing more, to bind it and turn it into some building materials. So it's got some great qualities in that it's fairly water resistant, just like a plastic bottle. It doesn't really absorb much moisture. It lasts a long time. It holds its shape really well. And the beauty of it, when it's managed properly, it can be recycled at the end of life. So
yeah, right. So it already starts out as a recycled product. And
starts out.
We can feel good about when we throw our plastic bottles into the recycling that maybe they're gonna come back and be used by you guys.
Well, that's right. And I know there is some sort of negativity in and around synthetics and plastics, but there's a lot of plastic in the world that needs to be recycled, and if you've got, which we've worked incredibly hard on in the last few years, is closing the loop properly on the PET plastic side of our business, so that when you take a product and recycle it, you're not continually degrading it down into nothing. You're actually trying to repurpose it at the top of that supply chain again. And through some pretty exciting technology and machinery that we've put in, we've been able to do that, and there's some more opportunity on the horizon to even go one step further. So back to that journey, polyester insulation became quite a big part of the business, and that sort of put us into Australia as well. They had a similar program over there that just went gangbusters. So some of the best years up until the recent ones with Autex were back in those days around those government insulation projects. And then we had architects that were trying to specify carpet on the walls just to control some acoustics, but the carpets just didn't meet the fire code. They met the fire code for the floor, but not the walls. So we came up with a product, a PET, same fibre, but a product that could give you some acoustics on the wall. That's gone into classrooms, and there's not many classrooms in New Zealand, I don't think, that doesn't have Autex composition on the wall.
Fantastic. So explain that what you mean by acoustics, and how important that can be in differing environments where you end up selling product. Obviously, we're in an audio studio, so some good acoustic treatment, helps with what we're doing for recording. But I think the uses are, pretty far and wide these days, aren't they?
Absolutely, and getting more and more required, I think, in buildings. So I mean, anyone that's been into a cafe or restaurant where they're sitting, within a metre of someone and can't hear what they're saying knows the importance of acoustics, I think. So, yeah, there's a lot of studies in and around, especially around learning, just the quality of the learning experience when you can actually hear every word that's being spoken. So that's where our journey started in that acoustics, I think. So when you've got a lot of hard surfaces within a space, and a lot of architecture now, a lot of hard surfaces are favoured. There's some beautiful stone products and, very simplistic design that where a lot of hard surfaces are in a space. So the downside of that is you tend to get a lot of sound bouncing around. Any hard surface, you get sound bouncing off it, which is that reverberation and that echo. So our products sit, on walls and ceilings within those spaces and just absorbs that sound, so it stops it bouncing back. And when we started our journey into acoustic products, all that really existed was fiberglass panels that I think architects were really trying to hide away. We have to put acoustics in, they don't look fantastic, so let's try and hide them up in the corners and those sorts of things. So that was a really important part of our journey, was to start to, be led by design and create some acoustic products that actually now have become the feature in a lot of these spaces. So, and a lot of these spaces you walk into, you wouldn't realise that these products are there for acoustics. The colour range that we've got and just the way that we can use these products in these spaces, just it's been amazing actually to see the development of product over that time. It's been a great journey to be a part of.
Yeah. The role of the architects within this picture for you, where, how important are they to you? Is it, and, what does that relationship look like?
They've been an incredibly important part of the Autex's success, I think. So we work with a lot of great designers, and when I say work with, we're working alongside, so they're obviously, as they're designing these spaces, they've got ideas and concepts and visions, and we need to work and fit in with that. So some of the product development that we've had, some of the products we've come out with have come out of this relationship with architects saying, hey, this is what I'm thinking, and we've come up with ways to manipulate the product to make it look like what they want, So we spend a lot of time with architects, and I think they're, given the amount of products and that they need to know about, they're probably not specialists in any of it, so they really rely on those product supply companies to be able to give that technical advice. So we work really hard on, giving advice in and around where products should go, how much to be used, what sort of frequencies need to be absorbed, and that then dictates what types of products we'd put forward and suggest, and ultimately they tend to go with, which is great. But we'd be nowhere without their vision and design skill. Some of our products do look amazing, but it's off the back of these architects coming up with these wonderful ideas and visions and dreams.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of creativity, that certainly I've seen from the New Zealand architects. I was visiting architect in Christchurch a while ago, a friend who'll be probably listening into this episode, actually visiting his premises, and they had this building that had been, I guess, unable to be used after the earthquakes in Christchurch. That's just quite near to the square. Of course, the cathedral came down and hadn't been used for years and years, and then they've obviously strengthened the building and so on. And just going into their space and seeing all the design elements, and a good portion of that was acoustic type treatment. Boy, absolutely superb what can be done with what would have been any old space of no style or anything, and then great architect can come in and really transform it.
Absolutely.
Now the other sort of scenarios that you see acoustic treatments being used in, I mean, I know for myself within our business with looking after technology for organisations, one of the areas over the last sort of decade or two has been this increase in video conferencing, and what used to be just a boardroom for internal meetings, really you end up with often a couple of TVs on the wall and a camera. You need to have good acoustics in the room for those that are sitting there sort of chatting with remote participants often. And even though there's an element of AI that can improve a bit of echo for your outgoing audio. You often get better results if you've got good audio treatment in boardrooms and meeting rooms. How much of a part of what you do is those sort of typical business scenarios and improving the acoustics in those environments?
Look, I think we've certainly seen it off the back of that increase in video conferencing and team calls, the way that we do business now. I think more recently we've seen companies trying to get people back into the office post-COVID. So really trying to create beautiful spaces that welcome people back in. So I think, creating nice shared spaces and sort of that hot desking environment, you're still putting a bunch of people together in a space, but you still want that space to work. So there's so much going on within businesses now. You need a lot of rooms to be cross-functional and multi-use. So look, having good acoustics mean that typically people just are quieter within that space. It's amazing when when you can reduce the noise, people then speak quieter because it's quieter, It's sort of hard to give you a really concrete answer, but I think anyone that we've got it out at our showroom out in Auckland, we've got a space with no acoustics that when you walk through the reception area, there's no acoustics, and then you walk into the showroom that's got acoustics. And that's just such a great way to show people what a room is like before and what a room is like after. And you see companies spend a lot of money on the tech gear and cameras and all of those things, and then you get a bunch of people in the room that can't quite hear what others are saying, and it really justifies the cost, I guess, of doing a room properly. And we treat a lot of rooms after the fact. Our product tends to go in relatively late in the piece, and often projects are running out of money at that point, so it's sometimes cut out of the budget. And then we often have to go back in a few months later and try and retrofit product back in because, again, you've spent a lot of money on a space. It looks wonderful, but it's got to perform. So that's really where we deal, is just in the performance of those spaces. Yeah. And certainly around education, it's just been so massive for us, backed, I guess, by the research, just to show the quality of education really depends on how well kids can hear, wherever they're sitting within that classroom, the front or the back. You tend to have the naughty kids at the back, and that's often the hardest to hear what the teacher's saying up the front. So we've done a lot of work in that space, and we do a lot in universities and sports halls and even swimming pools, spaces that you don't quite think need acoustics. There's a lot of hard surfaces within a swim school. Yeah,
you get a massive echo. And I remember when my son was learning to swim in swimming school, space we went, you really hear those echoes, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you talked about the role of sort of architects in terms of maybe, pushing you to in different directions to maybe, solve problems for them. What sort of innovation, have you seen, come from that sort of encouragement and the problems that they might bring to the table for you?
I think architects, they sort of love their own design flair on something. It feels like you can offer quite generic products, but sometimes they want a little bit of their own design flair across that, and that's something that we've been able to offer. Probably 40% of what we do is custom, and that may just be a small customization, or it might be something really new, and as I said, can lead to a new product innovation for us. But we started with composition, which is like a wallpaper. Essentially, it's a 10 mil thick wallpaper that goes on the wall. It's like a pinboard. It's pinnable. There's lots of colours. It's very durable. Protects the plasterboard and gives acoustics. And then we went into some panel products, like desk partitions, those types of things. And then we went into panels on the wall, and then we started going into ceilings, and then the innovation just really ramped up from there. And we've hired some wonderful people. Our design director and his design team are amazing in terms of what they think up and come up with. And then we sort of entered this race to innovate with competitors. Everyone's racing to do what the others are doing, and so it's pushing you consistently to come up with something new. And we were the first to start printing on our panels, so that brought in a design flair for architects. Anything from a photograph and scenery through to logos, through to patterns and colour and all of those things, which printing really opened the door for. And then we got into CNC cutting and started putting grooves into panels and did a lot of multi-design in and around cutting grooves and patterns into this panel, which gives sort of a 3D structure to it. And then when you cut a panel with a V-groove, you can then fold it. So we started folding up panels into beams, and actually acoustically, when you've got a hollow void inside that, it improves the acoustics, which is great. So we got
This is the wood beams that you've created.
Yeah, so we call them raft, so like a raft ceiling. So first of all, it was just colour panels, and then we started printing. So we started printing timber patterns across these beams, which then made it look almost hard to tell if it was timber or not. But it's giving you quite a lightweight solution, whereas timber's relatively heavy and also gives you acoustics. And then we've just launched a laser etching machine, which puts texture onto the panel as well. So you've got a panel with a timber print that we can then put a timber etching pattern through, which again is getting harder and harder to tell it's not timber. So that's just some of the innovation. We've gone from colour. Colour was a big driver to start with, and then printing, and then texture, and then shape. So by heating and pressing our panels, you can get 3D structures and 3D tiles, and it's just sort of endless in terms of new product development. And then more recently starting to get into new fibres and natural fibres and new technology in that space. And then that environmental sustainability journey and around truly trying to close these loops. And I feel we've really led the way in some of those spaces, which again, competitors are fast following and catching up, but there's a lot of firsts for Autex, I think, which is great. And that comes down to, as I said, our people that are just so creative and will sort of give anything a go. And that coupled with architects continually trying to push boundaries and customise things, it's sort of been a great combination, and it's been quite organic in terms of that growth and some of the buildings and projects we've been involved in around the world. We sort of have to just have a bit of a laugh every now and then. A New Zealand company out of Avondale putting product into the Empire State Building, it's just, and some schools in Egypt, and we did a casino in Angola, just madness, really.
Wow. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the scale and the scope of the business now, and Autex as an entity, incorporates, the acoustic products that we've talked about. You've also still got some insulation products, and there's a little sports team in there as well. Tell us how that all fits together, right?
Yeah, there is, absolutely. So, New Zealand's always been head office and always been sort of the hero part of the business, I guess, and more recently, our export markets have grown. So Australia, we've been in Australia a long time, but in the last 5 years or so, just seen some exponential growth, and the team in Australia are doing such an incredible job and becoming sort of the bigger part of the Autex business. And that's all on the acoustic side of what we do. And about 10, 11 years ago, we went into the UK, which was sort of a full circle back for the owners. We're manufacturing out of Huddersfield in north of England, so almost taking the business home, I think was the feeling at the time. And we got a showroom in London and sales team based out of there, and we're pushing out into Europe now, which is great. And then 8 years ago or so, we moved into the US, so it's been a fairly slow burn there. It's a big market. It's something that we've taken us a while to get our head around. And I think, as most New Zealand companies are, probably a little bit nervous around the scale and the opportunity there. But we've just signed a soon to be released, but I could probably talk about it here a little bit, just a really big deal in the States with a large distributing partner over there. So the US for us is a really important market strategically moving forward. Mm-hmm. And the Warriors has been a super cool journey just to witness and be a part of. So Mark Robinson and his father David was a life member of New Zealand Rugby League, and I'm pretty sure Autex was one of the first sort of commercial sponsors of a New Zealand team. So they sponsored the Kiwi Rugby League team back in the early 80s or late 70s, I think it was. And that was purely off the back of David seeing them training, and they were all wearing different countries and different teams' jerseys, and he said, we're a New Zealand team, we need to be wearing our own uniform, so yeah. Autex sponsored the uniform, and there's some cool photos of back then them wearing New Zealand jerseys with Autex on the back. So there's always been this affiliation with rugby league, and we've sponsored the Kiwis for ages, we've sponsored the Warriors for a long time, Point Chev and some other rugby clubs, and really put some effort into growing rugby league in New Zealand, and the opportunity came up, must be 5 years ago now, the opportunity to have a look at the Warriors as that opportunity came up, and first of all sort of it was a joint venture acquisition there, and then Autex ended up buying the whole thing. So it's been a very different business to Autex in manufacturing, yet so complementary in terms of, I think, just culture, and we help out on a few things, and they help out and lean on us for a few things. So I think that side of it's been great. We've got a lot of diehard rugby league fans within Autex, and that's sort of one of the things in the interview process, which team do you support? And if the Warriors isn't your number one team, it has to be your number two team. And so, look, I think for Mark it's been great. I think he's sort of rolled over a little bit of the culture out of Autex into the Warriors, which is cool, and he's been involved for the right reasons, which again is sort of believing in people and wanting to grow a great club and some great teams. And I think he's only sort of just begun on the vision that he's got there. So he will tell you black and blue that we're going to win a premiership. So I have to believe him. I think he's achieved almost everything else that he set out to do. So hopefully at some point I'm coming back on to talk about that. But look, there's some great people on the Warriors side. Cam George does a great job. And so it's been a really interesting journey, just sort of something to sort of watch grow alongside what we're doing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And, the overall sort of scale of the business in terms of people and turnover now, what level are you hitting there?
So we're 175 odd here in New Zealand, which is great, across 2 manufacturing sites out of Avondale, and all our competition really comes out of China. So we're sort of the only other manufacturer in I mean, there's a few out of Europe actually, but we hold on to the fact that we're manufacturing here in New Zealand, which is great. So 175 odd here in New Zealand across 2 sites, and then Australia, we're head office out of Melbourne, and we've got similar numbers over there, around 160, 170. I lose count in the UK and the US because we're just growing so quickly, but I think 40 odd in the UK and maybe 30 odd in the US. And then if you couple that with the Warriors, I think all up we're around 650 odd people within the Autex Warriors group, which is crazy when you stop and think about it. And revenue-wise, we just ticked over 200 million last year, which was a big milestone.
Yeah, that's huge.
Big milestone for us. And we had some previous leadership that sort of said we don't want to get too big. We'll be a different company if we're at 150 or 100. And so the feeling was we sort of weren't chasing it too much. But, we ticked over 200, like I say, and it feels like nothing's really changed, to be honest. I feel we're still the same business. We're still a family business. We're getting a little bit more corporate, I guess, in the way we go to market and do things. But I'm sort of really proud of and love being part of a business that's got that family ownership and those values that go with that.
Yeah, what sort of stood out? What stood out to you over your journey with the business in terms of those family values and the company culture that has drawn you in? Because this is now where you've spent the large majority of your career, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've tried to leave a couple of times, but look, Mark, I think he's involved in the business, and he really cares about the people, and I think gives opportunity to people, like I said with me, that just didn't have, certainly I didn't have the experience for some of these roles that he said, hey, I think you'd be good at this, how about you give it a go? We've had some great people come through the business that you've almost continually out of your depth, which feels quite stressful at the time, but I think the growth that comes with that is massive. So yeah, look, there's a family vibe to what we do. I think Mark sometimes comes across as he might not take things all that seriously, but he does. He's actually a really deep thinker, and I think that's a real strength of his. He's keen to take a risk. He sort of sees opportunity a few years ahead of other people. He's bought a couple of machines that have sat there for a year or two while we figure out what to do with it or how to use it, and that's always sort of pushed us forward, I think. And there's been some moments in Autex's history where they've pivoted quite quickly, and some of those decisions have been quite big decisions, but thankfully, they've paid off, and we're in a great position now. It feels there's really good energy across the group. Everyone's working together really well, and we just got some great people, and we tend to hang on to people for quite a while too, which is great. We're just going to celebrate 50 years service this year for one of our employees, and we've got an honours board in the kitchen at work with a bunch of people with 30 years, 20 years, 15 years. It's multi-generation, I think that's almost the secret to what the Robinsons have done. It's just that legacy of people and opportunity, which has certainly benefited the business over time.
Yeah. Now you made a little comment around tried to leave a couple of times.
Oh, look, not seriously, but I think at one point early on, an opportunity came up, and I sort of said to Mark, hey, I've been offered this opportunity. looks quite interesting. I might take it. And he sort of said, give me 24 hours. And then, came back and said, well, look, this is where I think I want you to go. And yeah, thankfully hung around, and it's seriously been an epic journey. Like some of the places I've managed to go, and, some of the conversations and opportunities we've chased have just been really exciting and rewarding, I think, looking back.
Yeah. So just walk us through the I guess the different sort of phases of your journey, in the business. And since joining, you started in a business development role?
Yeah, started as an account manager calling on architects, which I really enjoyed, and still deal with some of the architects 15 years later. There's some great relationships. I think that's so good with sales too, right? You end up truly making friends with some of your customers that go beyond just doing business. So I did that a couple of years, and Mark sort of said to me, hey, I think we've got this export role coming up. I think you'd be good at that. Are you keen to give it a go? And I sort of said, yeah, why not? And then I said to him, well, how does it work? Do you plan my trips for me? Like, where do I go? What do I do? We had distributors in Asia and in a few places, and he sort of said, nah, it's up to you, plan your trip and go for it. So I ended up on my first trip ever. I think I went right around Southeast Asia, Japan, China, Thailand, and I had a suitcase at the time, and just first up into Japan, had no idea what I was doing, like absolutely no idea, but just you turn up, you meet with customers, you find out a little bit about what they're doing and go from there. And, we certainly had some opportunities that didn't pay off. We've set up an office in Southeast Asia, and we've since shut that down, and there's still a lot of learning along the way, and I've really enjoyed that part of it. And it just, I think that was quite pivotal in my journey at Autex. And then from there, moved into a bit more of a group sales and marketing role as the UK came on board, and the US sort of sitting as a New Zealand conduit to those businesses, because we export a lot of product up to them. And I think it was around COVID time, there was an opportunity potentially to step up into the MD role for New Zealand, the managing director role. And COVID was quite pivotal in that. I sort of said, right, if that's going to be the case, then I'm really going to try and own the communication across that COVID space, which was just so challenging for a business like us. We've got global markets. Some of the products we make are essential, but there's a whole lot of grey area around, well, does that mean we can manufacture or not? And it was sort of, you had to make a decision yourself and then sort of deal with the consequences afterwards. So there was a lot of moving parts throughout that time. And I think we did a pretty good job of it, in terms of trying to look after our people, try and keep the communication really strong so that people knew what was happening and when, and take some of that uncertainty away. But that was a big moment, how do we get through that? There was and out the other side, and then worked really closely with NZT in and around some really good growth grants that we went for, the IGFs. We've been through a couple of those, which have been quite big phases in being able to get into those markets. And then, moved into the managing director role for New Zealand. So sort of came back into the New Zealand business a bit more, realised I had to learn a bit more about insulation, because I hadn't really done too much of that up until that point. So really sort of immersed myself in that side of the business, which was really interesting. And I've sort of become pretty passionate around our green stuff insulation brand. And then, just been part of the senior group and on the board, which has been great, and been alongside Mark and some of the other directors as we've made some of these big decisions, and just been able to see some of the success in market. We've got a managing director in each of those key markets, and really good people that are doing some great things. And it really feels like we're part of a team and trying to push the whole business forward. So quite a long-winded answer to your question, but look, it's been varied. I feel like I've had 3 or 4 different jobs within my time at Autex, and each one's added something. And at some point it'll be time for someone else to have a go, and more than happy to step aside at some point and watch the next person step up. We've got great people that are ready to go. So,
what sort of study and so on and help did you need to get during your Autex journey?
Luckily enough, our CEO at the time said, look, I think you should do maybe an MBA, have a look at an MBA. And that was as I was potentially coming into the managing director role. So again, another opportunity. And I just sort of said, why not? This didn't quite know what I was signing up for. And I sort of said to myself, look, if they're putting me through this, I'm going to make sure I make the most of it. I'm going to really get after it. So it was literally, my family, work and study. That was it. You got to turn off everything else that's going on in your life for a couple of years. And look, it's only a couple of years out of that whole journey, but I found it so valuable, sort of getting under the hood of a few New Zealand businesses, really looking at some business theory and trying to apply it then back into Autex at the time. So I just immersed myself in that, and it was just good, I think, from a confidence perspective, as I was stepping up into that role. I think everyone has it, that imposter syndrome, thinking, I'm not qualified for this. What am I doing in this role? But I think for me, it gave a little bit of confidence there. And it builds that network a bit too out the other side. You've met a whole bunch of good people that are on the similar journey. And so, that was a big one for me.
Mm. Now, you've talked about looking after your people. When you've got across the business, across New Zealand and internationally, 600 odd people, how you look after your people is going to make a real difference, right? So what are the things that I guess you've really appreciated around how Autex is operated, and is that something you've made some changes to, or how does it look for you today?
Culture is really important for me, I think, and look, everyone's got their own style, and I think you can't get it right all the time, but I think trying to lead with the people first perspective has been really good. As I say, we've got some great people, and you've got to let people go on their own journey and sort of learn themselves through their own mistakes and success. So I think ego is huge. I'm not massive around ego, so I think ego is a big thing. If you can step out the way a little bit, and it's so tempting to get back into the weeds and get involved, and that's been a real shift, I think, for me lately, is just being able to do that, step away, and then you've got to think more long term and sort of have bigger discussions that sort of take longer, and you don't feel like you're achieving so much because it's not that day-to-day ticking off tasks,
Yeah.
So that's been a fundamental change. But where I'm going to with it, I think, is just sort of stepping back a little bit and trying to support people to succeed. I think that's really where I focus. There's so many ups and downs within a business. People have got all sorts going on outside in their lives that they bring into work, and we're lucky enough to have a great wellness program and really try and look after people across various fitness and healthy eating and all these things. So that's an important part of it. But trying to capture what Autex does, I think, and we reset values, and we really try and lead with those. We celebrate success that align with our values. We truly try and value long service, and I think Mark, when he's back in the business, he's great at that. He'll walk around the factory floor, shaking hands with everyone, and the door's always open, and there's, with me anyway, there's not a conversation I'm not prepared to have. So even when we go through some pretty tough times, I find that if you can just get people in a room and sort of talk them through why certain decisions have been made, or what you're trying to do long term, I think that's worked really well. But as I say, I don't get it right all the time, and it is something I'm pretty passionate about and try and do really well. So I think hopefully I'm on the slightly better side than not. But
yeah.
I think culture's come too from just our history. We've got a lot of people that have worked within the business a long time, and a lot of legacy stories get spoken about and remembered, and there is some, everyone's really proud of what Autex has achieved and their part they've played in that. So it's really recognising that, I think. And again, aligned with the Warriors and the success they have, just like the supporters and the fans of the Warriors, it's a certain type of person, right? And it's hard to describe, how they do it so well, but there's something there. And I think there's something there at Autex, which again is something that I'm really proud of, and hopefully is a legacy that sort of stays for a long time.
Mm. And what are some of the sort of practical, things that have become, part of how you operate, whether that's sort of fitness and well-being or other areas that, you see that have been helpful?
I think the wellness program's been great. It's something we're lucky enough to be able to do, and the owners of the business are really keen to offer that. So yeah, the fact that we've had a lot of staff engage with that and get some really good results has been great. But even just, we've got a commercial kitchen that supplements, so we fund a certain part of the meals for staff, but it brings everyone into that same space to have lunch every day, which just that in itself, from a culture perspective, is great. And then there's a group that we'll have lunch and then go for a walk together or sit outside together, and it's really trying to cross the bridge of those different departments. And the fitness side of thing, we just had a High Rocks challenge where there was 8 weeks training that everyone did, and we had IT involved, we had our production staff involved, health and safety, all these people that probably wouldn't see each other on a day-to-day basis that are all training and working out together outside of work. And then it sort of culminated in this event at the end where everyone was, it was a great day out, and I got involved, which was awesome. It was just great to be a part of some really cool people, no matter what your role is at the business or hierarchy. For me anyway, it doesn't really exist.
Yeah. Now, one thing I found fascinating over the last, last few years is seeing the variety of manufacturing that happens in New Zealand, and just actually wandering through, and you were good enough to take me on a walk through your manufacturing facilities in Auckland, which pretty impressive. There's a lot going on there, but what do you think it takes to to succeed today in manufacturing, especially when we consider just how much is coming out of China from a manufacturing standpoint, the cost challenges with that product that's often getting made very, very cheaply, and with very low cost labour compared to New Zealand, because as a business, Autex seems to be thriving and growing. Yet you've got that challenge going on in the background, right? That I guess doesn't ever completely go out of your mind.
Yeah, look, I think there's some confidence. I don't know if it's a New Zealand thing or not. I think we're relatively good people to hang out with and do business with, New Zealanders, and I think that certainly in the US and other places, it really sort of stands us in good stead. We can have a conversation, we can have a few beers, we can have a laugh. We don't take ourselves too seriously. We're there to do business, and we've got lofty goals, and we know what we want to do. But I guess we probably get there. Sometimes some of the people we're dealing with probably don't know how we ended up in getting to where we get to. It's sort of, I think that's been great, and it's certainly something that we pride ourselves on. I think just that innovation, and I know it's used a lot in New Zealand, but some of the people that we've got is just our strength. It'd be very hard to replace them. It's very hard for others probably to get people like some of the people we've got. And some of the machines and technology and that they've come up with is just amazing. And so for us, that innovation piece has been one that's really separated us out. And it's quite humbling when you go to some of these trade shows and there's a Chinese manufacturer there that sort of says, "Oh, Autex, we know you. We look at you all the time." What they're saying is we're copying your products as closely as we can. And look, you see it, and sometimes, although it does upset you, but imitation is the form of flattery. So I think that innovation piece is key, but also just a little bit of confidence in and around some of these markets are big markets, and we just sort of go, well, let's give it a crack. Let's just turn up and give it a go, and you connect with other Kiwis around the world, and there's just something magic that goes with that. I think it's hard to put words around, but I think we just ignore the fact that we're a small island at the bottom of the world, and we just sort of say, look, why not? Why can't we be up in these markets doing what we're doing, and why can't we set up manufacturing there, and let's give it a go. So hard to answer that, but I think really it's been product development, good people, and just that confidence to go out and have a go.
Now, you talked about Australia, similar number of people in Australia as you've got in New Zealand. A lot of Kiwi businesses, struggle to have success outside of New Zealand at all, and often Australia is that sort of focus because, reasonably similar to New Zealand and right next door. Why do you think that that's going, well for Autex?
And we fell in that trap too. I thought Australia must be the same as New Zealand, and it's really not. There's some real differences in those markets that we just don't have here. So I think, again, it's balance of people. We've got some great Kiwis working in the Aussie business, but that's not necessarily the reason why that's successful. We've got some awesome Aussie people there too, So it's taken a little while for them to get going, but in the last 5 years, it's just been incredible. And they're always the ones to set ambitious targets that we sort of look at from New Zealand and say, really? But they go out and get it, they go after it. So they're really sort of starting to lead our business forward out of Australia, and the size of the market's great. And I guess just location-wise, it's easy enough to get product across on a short lead time. And so they're very much an Australian business, I think. That's certainly a differentiator. And even with the US, we went in there thinking, everyone's going to want to know that it's New Zealand made. And we went in off the back of that New Zealand made story. And some of the Americans just said, I don't know where New Zealand is. That all sounds a bit scary. I'm not sure I want to do business with you. So we had to pivot pretty quickly. And now more than ever with tariffs and all of that going on, made in market is just so powerful. And we've got light manufacture in all those markets. And we're looking to increase that and put more manufacturing in over the coming years. So it's worked out well for us, I guess, just being able to react to what's going on in the market and be able to adjust the business slightly to make the most of it. But yeah, Australia for us it's just phenomenal how fast that's growing and the potential scale that's coming from there. And our MD there, he's been with the business a long time, but he's been the absolute champion to say that we can do it and we're going to do it and let's go, And the business just get on so well now. Again, we've had some personnel change over the last little while, which has just allowed the businesses to really work together to sort of impact Autex globally rather than each individual branch used to be a little bit isolated and competing against each other. And all of that's not helpful.
Mm-hmm. And walk us through what you've learned around the US as a market. We see a lot of variation in terms of challenges and different types of export sectors. But what would you say have been the big takeaways for you?
I think the scale of it, and we've only just realised that, and that's sort of pushed us towards this large distribution partner that we've just signed with, because scale there is everything. We had about 8 sales reps covering the whole of the US, and you saw the new distribution partnership we've got, we'll increase that to about 140, which is the scale you need to be. And so for us to scale up and get 140 sales reps on the ground, from a operational cost through to just finding people and managing people, it's just so difficult. So look, we've tracked along fairly well and we've always been profitable there, and that's been interesting, but it just means it takes time. And some of our competitors, we were sort of the first PET acoustic product in the US, and it was just great timing in that Acoustics really wanted to try something different. They were sick of fiberglass panels and all of that, so it was like something new, colourful, and we were just, the demand was fantastic, but we just couldn't get out and get across the whole US. You just couldn't talk to everyone, or you couldn't get in the door. It was very market specific.
Right, so you led the way, product wise, but then you didn't have the capability to really fully serve the market.
Yeah, I guess how do you get out and tell 320 million people about your product? It just takes time. So we had, some competitors saw what we were doing, started up, then they got backed by private equity, set up some light manufacture, scaled quickly, sold, and just there's been 2 or 3 companies that have done that, whilst we've been tracking along at our own pace, and for us that's not really our model. Autex has always sort of controlled our own destiny, and we feel like we're the best at selling our products, so we need to sell them. So it's been a real change for us to go down this new path, but we're incredibly excited about it. I feel it's going to give us some epic scale and is really going to drive some good volume out of that market in a controlled way, in a really well-aligned partnership that's going to benefit, I think, us and them. So that's been probably 8 or 9 months work ticking along, and we're almost ready to push the button on that. So that's incredibly exciting, and I think you just got to treat it like it's a different market to anything you've experienced before. That's where I've come to at the end of it. I didn't know that at the start, but at the end of it, looking back, it's been a hell of a journey. I've loved every minute of it, but you can go to a new trade show every week if you want to over there in a different place. So how do you stand out? How do you make an impact? But then the scale of over there is you don't really need to make a big impact to actually get a relatively high volume of sales, So it's taken us a while, but I feel like we're on the edge of something pretty exciting.
Fantastic. Anything else that you want to add that we haven't sort of touched on as far as the Autex journey?
Not really. I think just the sustainability side. I think our design director he's become a bit of a leader in that space, and just really trying to, like I said before, close the loop on plastics and that PET side of things, which I think we've done incredibly well. He's developed some machines that repelletize our waste and injection mould it back into parts that we then use. And the journey there is just fantastic, taking back product, repurposing it into new products. So there's a great story to be told there, not on this podcast, but I think it's an important part of our journey and where we're at now. We're sort of starting to lead a bit in that space, I think. And then on natural fibres, there's obviously a lot of commentary around strong wool at the moment and government policy around using strong wool in buildings. And we're probably 4 years into a wool project. We realised that, hey, there's a whole lot of great natural fibres out there. Let's start exploring it and looking into it. And there's been some real pioneering work around LCA, the way that we measure the product that we've just released, an Embrace Wool product. And it was the first building product with a carbon negative story, carbon negative footprint.
You mentioned LCA.
The life cycle assessment of a product. So essentially looks at all the contributing factors to a product's lifetime from the start of the product to the end of the product. Sort of assesses all the carbon used and sequestered and all those things. And that, again, some risk around that, going out to market with that, it was quite a risk, it was quite a big thing and we put a lot of work into it and third-party verified and all of that. But for us, again, it was just stepping outside of that comfort space a little bit and really trying to do it right. So, the supply chain goes all the way back to individual farms and the way they farm then impacts the end product. And wool and PET, they're often, or synthetics, they're often talked about in terms of, one versus the other. But again, there's great products that exist in both of those spaces. And we're fairly early on in that wool journey and there's been some real challenges to do it properly. There's often shortcuts to get to where you want to go, but we're certainly trying to do things methodically and do things right. So that's an important next chapter, I think, for Autex and where we're going. It's, again, diversifying out into some really interesting products within that natural fibres space and really trying to unravel the sustainability approach. There's a lot going on there and there's a lot of decisions you need to make in terms of how you approach it. And I think what we've done, not me personally, but within our with our design director and our design team, they're doing an incredible job. So yeah, that was all I thought I'd throw in there, just to pay some respect to those guys that have done a huge amount of work. And
yeah. So if you had to pick sort of one project that that really stands out, that you're really proud of, that you've been involved in as a business, what would that be?
Look, there are so many, but I think here in New Zealand as a good example would be MediaWorks, which was a recent fit out. I say recent, a few years old now, but Warren and Marnie were the architects, and there's a really high lofted reception area there as you walk in, and they wanted 3 really standout feature walls that, for one, being a recording studio and within media, I think they wanted to perform incredibly well in terms of acoustically, but they really wanted to capture sound. So one wall, you wouldn't know it unless I said, but it's sort of, the theme is sort of speakers, and it's sort of got this 3D form and folded product that sort of makes it look like a series of uniform shapes, but very impactful and sort of take the form of speakers. And then on the back wall is sort of, my interpretation anyway, is sort of frequency. It's got these folded shapes coming out of the wall in a very, quite far, probably 40 odd centimetres off the wall in quite a jagged shape, which again is so impactful when you walk in. It's the first thing you see. And then on the left-hand wall, we've ended up calling it the Wookiee wall. I'm not too sure why, but a whole series of overlaid different cuttings of material. So it's taking, none of those were products. They were sort of, again, an idea that Warren and Marnie said, hey, well, what about this? And it sort of translates over a series of time into these shapes and features and sculptures. So we've got product, throughout their studios, from really high performance acoustic stuff, which is quite boring to look at, but performs incredibly well, through to some of these really standout features. So for us, that was a long time in the design, and it was quite a large fit out that took place. So it was quite a journey. The account managers that were involved, working so closely with the architect and the installers, BJs were the installers. They did an incredible job trying to take from a piece of paper and some plans to then try and build this visual art piece within that space. So for me, that's one of the standouts, definitely.
I mean, I remember seeing the photos of it when they opened at the new HQ, and it was just stunning. So got in touch with a friend. It's like, oh, it's time for a catch up. So I was keen to come in and have a look. And yeah, really, really impressive. So yeah, it's great to have those sort of examples that really stand out.
And we love New Zealand projects too, right? Made in New Zealand product, made on the doorstep, involved in these projects locally is great. And it's, a lot of people that walk into those spaces that work for Autex are like, oh, there's our product on the wall. A lot of them, the first thing they do is look up at the ceiling and touching the walls. And it's a bit of a joke within Autex how we sort of behave when we walk into restaurants and buildings now, because we're just so keen on figuring out what products have been used.
Yeah. Well, it's been fantastic to hear your story, Rob, and certainly some of the Autex story. You had a chance to give a little bit of advice to listeners, sort of something big that you've learned along your journey that really sticks with you that you could share with listeners.
I think it's really just making the most of every opportunity. You get a lot of decisions. Oh, should I take this new role or promotion? Or I think just don't sit still. Always look for that next chance to prove yourself and back yourself. There's a lot of people talking around, I don't have the experience for that, or I'm not ready for that. But I think you learn so quickly through just jumping in and doing it. So I think, having some sort of discipline to the way you go about it. And for me, it's always been thinking 2 steps ahead. I really want to, one day I want to be in this type of position or in this situation, and you really got to start breaking that down in little chunks and steps along the way. So I get everyone's not like that, but for me, that's been really important. I've got a really clear idea, I guess, on where I want to go and staying true to the values that you've got. And even if you're in a business that may not have the exact values you've got, there's some common ground there, I'm sure. So as long as I think there's some values that align with what you want to do and want to achieve, and just keep pursuing that relentlessly, I think that's my advice. But I know everyone's different and has a different approach. But I think taking every opportunity has been a big part of what I've always been up for, and it's been a really cool journey as a result.
Fantastic. Well, it's been great to chat with you today. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thanks very much for your time.
All right. Cheers, Rob. Well, it was great to sit down with Rob Woolner, and I hope you enjoyed hearing from him as much as I do. The New Zealand Business Podcast is proudly brought to you by One New Zealand and Gorilla Technology. Feel free to get in touch with me, Paul Spain, if you'd like to hear more about how Gorilla Technology can help your business. Be sure to listen in to our other episodes featuring many of New Zealand's most successful leaders, including founders such as Rob Drury of Xero, Cecilia and James Robinson of My Food Bag, Sir Peter Beck of Rocket Lab, Brooke Roberts of Sharesies, Sir Michael Hill, Sir Graham Henry, amongst many others. And because a rising tide lifts all boats, you can contribute to lifting New Zealand's success by sharing a favourite episode with a friend or colleague. Thanks for listening in. This is Paul Spain signing out. Look forward to catching you again on the next episode.
The New Zealand Business Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, your strategic and proactive IT partner.